You are listening to the Therefore a Geek podcast, episode number 80. Hi, everybody, and welcome to Therefore a Geek. I'm Andrew.
And I'm Montgomery Scott.
That's not nearly as clever as your normal.
Well, look, how many of these I've done? They're not all going to be fucking brilliant.
You realize I'm going to play that clip back to you every so often. They're not all going to be brilliant. Like, that's, you just, ammunition, like,
They're not all going to
ammunition.
Be fucking brilliant. They will all be brilliant, just not at the level of fucking brilliant.
I thought you were going to say they were all going to be fucking.
I hope so.
So today we are going to be discussing Star Trek and its 50th anniversary, because
just past this week, right?
Yep, just this past week. You know, I mean, we're both pretty big Star Trek nerds. Something we've bonded over the years, and
I grew up on that stuff. I kind of was into it and then would fall out of it and then come back into it. But you've always kind of had it's been a constant presence in your life, because I feel like when we were living together, I feel like in the 4 years that I watched you go live there, you went through the series at least twice. Like, I feel like everything, like at least Voyager, DS9, and Next Gen, like twice.
I went through them completely once while you lived with me. And then I went through, I would go through bits and pieces that I liked.
Okay.
Yeah, no, it's definitely been a huge influence on both my intake of pop culture and just, I don't want to say life in general, but, you know, it's certainly been a source of enjoyment since I was a kid.
Do you remember when you first found out about it? What was the first time you saw it or encountered it?
I don't remember the first time I encountered it. Probably the youngest I can remember it, though. My dad recorded a couple of episodes so I could watch them. He recorded actually it was when they aired the Next Gen season finale or season opener.
Uh-huh.
And I can't remember which half it was, but it was when Lore gives Data the emotion chip from Dr. Sung.
Yeah.
And he's leading the Rogue Borg element.
Mm-hmm.
I can't remember if it was the finale half of that one or the season premiere half of that one. But I remember my dad recorded that one for me so I could watch it later. And I remember watching the series finale live.
I remember the series finale really big, and it was my father who got me into it, because my dad was a big science fiction fan. Like, he was just always interested in science fiction, and he was a Star Trek fan, and I think he really did enjoy the Next Generation series a lot. So he watched it. He's like, back then you had to watch it when it aired.
Right.
So, you know, he would watch it, so I would watch it with him. So as being young, I have a collection of fragmented memories from all sorts of different episodes, so that when I sit and watch the episode in full, I'm like, oh, I remember this now.
Right.
I remember this. This was pretty good. But it was all, yeah, I basically grew up on the Next Generation like I think you did. And then you got into DS9 and Voyager, and I kind of grew up. What kept you watching the show? Do you remember, what was the appeal for you?
So I actually didn't keep watching the show. I got really into the original series movies. And that's kind of where my interest kept going. Mm-hmm. I didn't start watching DS9, really watching. I mean, I saw an episode here or there, whatever. I didn't really start watching DS9 or Voyager until we were in college.
Mm.
A friend of ours, Brian Brown, had the whole DS9 series on DVD, and I borrowed it from him. And in college, I probably went through DS9 2 or 3 times.
Oh, wow. That was your favorite one, right?
Yeah, that is still my favorite one.
That's your favorite. See, I guess I stuck through it as a weekly fan from just watching it with my dad from Next Gen through DS9, and then maybe 4 or 5 of the seasons of Voyager until I just got tired.
Yeah.
I just got tired of the show. I don't know what happened. It lost its interest for me somewhere along the line. And so, like I said, I kind of fell out of it and into it. I did enjoy the movies. I remember watching the movies a lot, because they reran them on television a bunch of times.
Yeah, I remember my dad taking me to go see Star Trek Generations.
Yeah, my dad did that too.
There was a big movie theater back in Phoenix called the Cine Capri. and it has one of those like really old, like it's not IMAX big, but it's a really huge screen. And I remember him taking me there specifically to go see it because of how cool it would be to see it on this huge screen.
I remember seeing the series finale, and then like the movie came out soon after that.
Yeah.
And I remember my dad taking me to see the movie, and I thought the movie was just kind of okay. But I do remember that's only memorable for me because that's when Blue Star Shopping Center actually had a movie theater. It hasn't had a movie theater in a long time, and it's back when I remember them having a movie theater.
Nice.
That goes way back. I saw Broken Arrow in that theater. That's dating me. That's really dating. That's when my dad would sneak me off to R-rated movies as a kid. But of course, the show didn't start with us. It predates us by like a solid 25 years.
Oh, generation and a half, probably?
Yeah, like 20 years. I mean, we were both born in 85. So the
Right.
show started when? In the mid-60s?
66.
66. Okay, so like a full 20 years before we were born.
Yep.
So that's when it started. You're the I'm gonna defer to your kind of Star Trek trivia knowledge here. Just do a quick thumbnail sketch of how this show came about, and Gene Roddenberry in the original cast.
Let's see what I can call. I mean, so like Gene Roddenberry, prior to getting to show business, a little bit of an interesting career. Was a bomber pilot. Was a pilot for Pan Am. There's actually a great oatmeal cartoon.
I was just going to bring that up.
Yeah, I mean, tear-jerking and everything of him surviving an aircraft crash as either the pilot or co-pilot, I can't remember, and basically talking to a young woman who was on the flight. And then got himself into television, and this is one of the pilot shows he wrote.
Well, he's talking to a woman on an aircraft. He's recounting his story of crashing to this woman in the comic book.
Yes.
Right?
Well,
yes, okay.
Yeah, in the comic, yes.
In the comic. Just so it's clear, there wasn't a woman on the flight that he crashed in.
No. Yeah, I mean, so Star Trek, to be perfectly honest, Star Trek almost didn't get made.
Mm-hmm.
And Star Trek getting made is actually in large part due to Lucille Ball.
Because they were under her studio, right?
Yep, they were under Desilu.
Mm-hmm.
They ordered a pilot, and CBS had first crack at it.
Wait. Did you say Lucille Ball or Lucille Liu?
Lucille Ball.
Okay,
her production company is called Desilu.
Desilu, right? Okay, I just wanted to make sure.
Yeah. So they ordered a pilot. The pilot did not air, although you can go back and watch it.
That's with the emotional Spock, right? That's the emotional Spock.
The emotional Spock, the female executive officer, and no Captain Kirk.
Right, it was Pike.
It was Captain Pike. Without the one light for yes, two lights for no.
Yeah, you think it's like they're in the future, and like Stephen Hawking can talk with his hand, and they still have one light for no, two lights, or one light for yes, two for no in the future. I thought that was kind of funny.
Yeah, that was good. So they made the first pilot. CBS, I guess, got the first crack at it. Decided to take a pass. They went to NBC. NBC liked the concept, but didn't like the pilot.
Mm-hmm.
So they went ahead and they wanted to do a second pilot. The production board, Desilu's board, didn't want to spend the money on a second pilot. And Lucille Ball actually vetoed the board as their chairman, and put the second one into production. And that's what became the first episode of Star Trek. Now, I think what's interesting for Star Trek at its time, you mentioned the cast. Obviously it's a cast we've kind of come to know and love,
and almost take for granted.
Yeah,
like it's just they're always going to be around, right?
Right, yeah. And although I think Leonard Nimoy's passing recently has shaken that that thought. But it's also a pretty diverse crew.
Right.
Cast. Right, you have an African American female, you've got an Asian man, and you've got at that point a Russian character as of second season.
Right.
All three of which are fairly controversial for their time.
Yeah. Now, Gene Roddenberry was all about like social commentary in that original Star Trek series.
Oh,
Like
absolutely.
these allegories going throughout Star Trek and him really talking about what's going on with America at the time.
Absolutely. No, Roddenberry, very, very socially conscious person,
Hmm.
and knew the fact that the studio wouldn't let him come straight out and do an episode about racism, you know,
Hmm.
or things like that. And instead, like you said, he wrapped them in allegories, or it was an alien being racist towards another group of aliens.
Yeah, for what appeared to be trivial reasons.
Right,
He couldn't do human racism, but you could do alien racism, and somehow that got passed.
right, and he knew enough to make that happen, and I think that's one of the reasons the original series did so well. You know, we kind of see this. Well, I mean, I think you and I will agree far too often now. Star Trek is actually one of the first series to be saved by the fans. In
Hmm.
that it was actually scheduled to be canceled after the second season, and
Hmm.
there was so much fan outcry about it, and so many letters that they renewed it for a third season.
Right.
Star Trek's also one of the few shows that didn't make the 100 episode mark. The original series had 79 episodes, I think.
Let me check. Kind of got my notes right in front of me.
So yeah,
So I,
79 episodes.
yep. Yeah, I have a number. I have 80, but maybe that's including the pilot.
It might, but it's one of the few shows that didn't make the 100 episode mark for syndication and still went into syndication.
Right.
And in fact, Star Trek is, I believe, 69 was the last year that Nielsen didn't do breakdowns based on age demographics,
Hmm.
and that's part of the reason Star Trek was canceled, was because of the ratings. Had Nielsen done the age breakdowns, Star Trek was killing it for the 18 to 35-year-old male demographic,
Hmm.
which is very important to advertisers.
Sure. Sure.
So Star Trek would have actually continued had they done that, and in part that's a big reason why it went into syndication the way it did.
Right.
Is that they're 18 to 35-year-old males loved it. Actually, I had a story from one of the instructors at Maritime, who's an alumni from the early '70s, I think.
Hmm.
It's kind of mates. We called it was mate stalking,
Hmm.
and he was telling me they got an hour of TV a week when he was a cadet, and they had to petition the commandant of cadets to allow them to shift the hour of TV time by 30 minutes so that they could watch a full episode of Star Trek.
That's something.
Yeah.
What do you think? So we've watched the original series. I don't think I've seen every episode of the original series. I don't think I've gotten through the entire. Have you gotten through the entire thing?
I have not. It's the only one that and the animated series are the only ones that
Right.
I have not gotten all the way through.
Now there are just some really awesome classic sci-fi episodes that came out of Star Trek from that time, and some of them were really great, and some of them were just really bad.
There's some real raging turds there.
There's some stinkers in that one, but I
Spock's
think
brain.
yeah, but I think like the good ones are they hit so well. They basically, they were the good ones were so good you didn't forget them. They basically stuck with you, and I think that's always a hallmark of great writing and great science fiction writing is they stick with you forever. And I think the staying power of those episodes and the loyalty of the fans really speaks to just how well that show was conceived. Also, just the writers on that show, the original, they were getting like serious science fiction writers to write that series. Of course, the famous one was The City on the Edge of Tomorrow, famously written by Harlan Ellison, the science fiction writer, and also famously edited by the producers to fit television. I think is a really good example.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, I've watched pretty much all of the major episodes, the major episodes, the important ones.
And City on the Edge of Forever. If I said tomorrow, that was my mistake.
Yep. City on the Edge of Forever. Sorry. And but I mean the good episodes are just spectacular.
Yeah, it's quality science fiction, and they're basically like short little movies.
Yeah, I mean, and even with the limited special effects and budget and whatnot that they had,
Mm-hmm.
they were still just that good. Like the writing and the characters and everything were that good that you could overlook the guy in the foam, the foam latex costume,
Right.
trying to smash Kirk with styrofoam rocks.
Yeah, the gore. Yeah.
The Gorn, yeah.
Talk about for a second, kind of what Roddenberry was going for, the kind of like the vision of Star Trek, at least to start, and then we'll work our way up through the movies and into the later series. But what was like the basic vision?
So kind of like what we were saying earlier. I mean, Roddenberry had this grand vision for Star Trek, and he tackled all these social issues, and the vision for Star Trek was this.
Well, I mean, like his vision of future. That's what I mean.
No, but that's what I'm saying. Like he tackled these social issues, but in part that was because he had a very utopian view of the future. Right. Everything wasn't perfect, right? You still had enemies and things like that, but humanity itself had taken steps forward. They had eliminated poverty and disease and hunger and warring amongst themselves for the most part, so that not just Earth, but then human colonies could go out, and then they were able to unify with all these other aliens and create the giant federation of all these, planets and civilizations living together in harmony and working for the benefit of all of them. And
he had a very strong, at least Roddenberry I'm talking about.
Yes.
From that first series, had a really strong sense of morality that comes across very strongly in that show.
Yes.
Of right and wrong, be it racism like we talked about, or even like he oftentimes in the show you would run across these like omnipotent or all-powerful godlike aliens that were controlling other species, and how Kirk would break them from their haze that they would exist in, or they would always violate the Prime Directive, which I always thought was kind of funny.
Well, and I think one of the things I really love about Star Trek, especially in the earlier season, and this carries into Next Gen too very heavily, is that while they at times have to resort to violence is always their last resort. Right. They only fight either to defend themselves or as when all other means have failed.
Right.
And I think that it was just and again, Roddenberry was very, very adherent to that. Mm-hmm. I mean, there are a couple times when Kirk plays crazy or something. Mm-hmm. But the idea is when he's doing that, he's obviously not in his right mind because he's taking such an aggressive tact.
So the show ends in '69. It gets canceled after just three seasons.
3 seasons.
And then there's a lull, and then it moves into the movies.
Well, the important thing to remember is, so there were a couple of false starts for a sequel series.
Right.
And it's funny listening to Leonard Nimoy or William Shatner interviews, because there were these couple of false starts, and then it's canceled 69, 77 Star Wars happens.
Right.
And every studio out there says, "Oh fuck, we need science fiction, and we needed it 10 minutes ago."
Right.
So at that point, they're like, "All right, we're gonna Paramount's like, we're gonna do another Star Trek series." And then they started working towards the Star Trek series, and then they said, "Hey, let's do a movie instead."
Right.
And so then that became Star Trek: The Motion Picture in '79.
Directed by a fantastic guy named Robert Weiss, who you may know from movies like The Sound of Music and West Side Story, but who I know from great film noirs such as The Setup and I Want to Live. But that was the first one in '79. And then there's a series of them. Kind of, especially what's interesting is the series of Star Trek: The Motion Picture is kind of a standalone. And then there's kind of a trilogy wrapped up in this series from Wrath of Khan to Voyage Home.
Yeah.
It's kind of interesting. This Wrath of Khan, I think, stands out as probably the best one in the entire lot. I think fan consensus is that's the best one.
No, yeah, and this is, I would say, in the entire franchise. Mm-hmm. I know you and I have a particular fondness for Star Trek VI.
I do, and I know a lot of people hate it.
And Walter Koenig apologized to us for it.
I know, that was really
That
strange.
was so great.
Do you want to talk about that now, or do you want to wait till we get to it?
We can wait a second. We'll tease the audience a little bit. That was
So you got Wrath of Khan comes out, huge hit, and I mean, there's no spoiler now. Spock dies, and then, I mean, I think you and I both agree that one's great. Search for Spock always struck me as really weird. That one never landed for me with Christopher Lloyd as the Klingon. I don't know. What did you think of that one?
I think so. Christopher Lloyd as the villain was kind of lame. It was the introduction of the Klingon bird of prey, which is kind of become a series, a franchise staple.
Yeah.
For not being in it very much, it's very Spock centric, and it's intentional. So Leonard Nimoy did not want to come back after Star Trek II, which is part of the reason Spock died at the end.
Right.
And this was basically the search for Spock was their way of getting him back into it. And
because I think he directed it, right?
And I was about to say, because he directed it. Which actually opened the door later on for terrible, terrible things in Star Trek V.
Right.
But, I mean, that's really kind of the thing.
That one just struck me as strange, because at the end of Star Trek II, you've got this fantastic cat and mouse game between Kirk and Khan has this apocalyptic weapon called the Genesis device. It detonates inside his ship and creates a planet, and the movie almost picks up sometime later at this same planet that's created, the Genesis planet, and Spock's body that had been given a burial at sea, is on this planet, and Spock slowly comes back to life, which I always thought was kind of weird, but okay.
It was weird. It also felt like a lot like it was undoing a lot of what we had just seen in the last film.
Right. I would agree with that.
So then after that, that you get Star Trek IV, which
I did not like.
You don't like it all. It's generally considered not like the fan favorite, but a bigger fan favorite.
Yeah, there are people who defend the film quite passionately. Which we should also point out, Star Trek III is the first movie where an Enterprise blows up. That should
yes,
be,
this is that's worth noting.
Yeah,
because it won't be the last.
Right. I always thought Star Trek IV was kind of hokey, in no small part because we started doing time travel again. To get whales, and they're in the 80s. They spend most of the time in 1980 San Francisco, and I don't know. That one just didn't register for me. Where do you sit on this one?
Yeah, as I've gotten older, I think I've liked this one less and less because it is so silly. I've got to find it somewhere. I just saw it a couple days ago in regards to the 50th anniversary. The punk rock kid on the bus in this movie went on to write like all kinds of crazy shit. Like
what do you mean? Like manifestos, or he became a writer in Hollywood? Like
a Hollywood writer.
Oh, really?
Let me see if I can pull it up real quick.
All right, while you're doing that. And the next one we have is the notorious Final Frontier, where Shatner directed it. I've only ever seen that one once. I remember not liking it, but people freaking hated it when it came out. Like, this is considered the low point of the film franchise, I think, by many. Do you remember what made people so mad about this one?
I just think it wasn't very good.
Just old-fashioned, not good?
Yeah, well, so when I mentioned this before, so Shatner directed this one.
Right.
And
will you tell the story where you watched about the special features where Shatner's being interviewed? Tell that one really quick.
Yeah, so I got like a big box set of Star Trek movies, and it had like I think Star Trek 1 through 5 had all these special features with them, and I watched the special features, and I was just like, there was an interview with Shatner. It was 17 minutes long, and he only actually talked for about 4 because he fucking Shatner spoke.
Right.
So if you actually, compressed out the spaces in his words and him, shifting postures and all that kind of nonsense, you had about a 4-minute interview, and my eyes were almost bleeding by the end. Okay, here we go. So it's an article off of Wired, and I'll make sure we get this into the show notes. In truth, Thatcher's post Star Trek accomplishments are extensive. He worked for decades with the Jim Henson Company.
Well, give the guy's name real quick before you go on.
Last name is Thatcher. Hang on, I gotta
Thatcher. Okay.
scroll through these. Are fucking Kirk Thatcher.
Kirk Thatcher. Okay.
In truth, Thatcher's post-Star Trek accomplishments are extensive. He's worked for decades with the Jim Henson Company, writing feature films like Muppet Treasure Island and directing TV movies for Jim Henson's Turkey Hollow. He earned an Emmy for his writing on the short-lived 90s series Muppets Tonight. In 2009, he directed the Muppets' much-beloved, oft-forwarded Bohemian Rhapsody video.
That is a great video.
It is. We'll put that in the show notes, too.
Yeah, just for your own enjoyment. Just watch that. It'll make your day better.
Yeah. He also apparently had a fairly close, kind of off and on relationship with Nimoy. The article says he also stayed in touch with Nimoy off and on for years after Voyage Home wrapped, eventually reuniting with the Trek star just a few years before Nimoy's death in 2015. He was like an uncle to me, Thatcher says now. He was a very calming presence. He had this big office overlooking Paramount, and at the end of the day, after filming Voyage Home, he'd pour himself a big gin and tonic with a lot of ice, and we'd sit there and chat. It was one of the highlights of my life and career.
That is nice.
Yeah.
So let's move forward a little bit to Star Trek VI, which I think is probably my second favorite of the film franchise, right behind Wrath of Khan.
I would say third for me, but yeah.
Yeah, it's right there for me just because I think still Wrath of Khan, is, as far as writing, directing, and story, is just, it's hard to beat, especially high drama. But Star Trek 6, to me, comes really damn close just because it's such a fun movie to watch.
Yeah.
It's almost like it's got everything you want in a Star Trek film, and it gives it to you, even if it is pretty darn obvious what's coming down. Like, it telegraphs its punches much more than Star Trek 2 does.
It also has the same director as Star Trek 2. So it's a lot more of the feel. It's Nicholas Meyer.
Right, and that plot is an interesting one because, again, they go back to kind of what works is they make an allegory for the world they're in. I believe this one was late 80s, right?
No, this is released December 6th, 1991. Which
So
makes it far more allegorical, I think.
Yeah, because by that point the Soviet Union is breaking up, and the allegory in the Star Trek world was the Klingon Empire, and it's kind of the Federation and Klingons are coming together because the Empire can no longer sustain itself, so they've got to come to the table and make peace, but there are people on both sides who don't want that to happen.
Right. Well, and it asks the major question, when the Cold War ends, what do you do with the Cold Warriors?
Right.
And Kirk has a hard time dealing with it. Yeah,
and what do you do with the losers? Because, the Soviet Union's been our competitor and adversary, and now how do you go forward with them? Right. And the Klingons in the series, the Klingons are a conquering empire who are oppressing and barreling people over, and now we've got to work with them. I always thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, I will say that the premise of the movie, which is the Klingon moon exploding and causing this irreparable damage to the Klingon homeworld, that kind of gets glassed over in the future. Like, that just kind of...
It does. It's kind of like they needed an excuse.
Right. I was just a little disappointed that never got addressed in, Next Gen.
No, that was one of those MacGuffins that just happened. But to get back to that Walter Koenig story, so we were at Big Apple Con when we were in college.
Oh, and the Big Apple Con.
And I loved the Big Apple Cons. I thought they were great. And Walter Koenig has a table there, and it's a big get for them, I would say, because other times at Big Apple Con, it's basically
Roddy Piper.
Yeah, it's ex-Playboy Playmates, ex-pro wrestlers, and then the guy from F Troop.
And the black kid from the Warriors.
Yeah, he's at all of them.
He was always there.
Yeah, I think he just lived in the area. And we went up to him and you just shook his hand and said hi and told him we were big fans of this show and series and movies. And I told him I thought, the one that was the most fun for me was Star Trek 6. And then he's like, wow, I'm sorry. He said something like, I'm sorry to hear that, or something like
Yeah,
that.
it was something
Which,
like, and he just kind of looks like, oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. And we were
yeah.
like,
I'm like, what, dude? Yeah, the cast. There was friction between that cast as they worked with each other, right? You do you know more about that?
I don't actually.
I know there was friction between many of them. Particularly, it was friction between Shatner and like everybody except Nimoy.
I can believe that.
I think he and Nimoy were good friends. So finally, we get another television series in '87
Right, yeah.
called The Next Generation, which is the one we just talked about. We grew up on, and I loved this one. That's probably the one I've seen the most of. I got a chance to watch some more of it when I was stuck in a hotel for a couple of days. For whatever reason, BBC loves to rerun Star Trek. Like I turn on BBC America thinking I'm going to watch Doctor Who or something, and like I get 7 hours of Star Trek reruns. I wasn't really complaining that much.
Right. You know, I was gonna say one of the things I love about this show is its constant improvement.
Mm-hmm.
If you watch episodes from the first
This
season,
particular series,
yes,
you mean? Yeah.
yeah, Next Gen. If
Yeah.
you watch episodes from the first season and then go watch episodes from the 7th season, in every regard, the series has gotten better. Right? The actors are better. The character development has gotten better. The writing is better. The production value is better. It's just they were constantly moving forward and making a better product.
Yeah, I would agree with that for the most part. I've always found at least the acting for Star Trek: The Next Generation to be its biggest weak point, and the character development, kind of attached to that. And I know there was some friction between Gene Roddenberry and the current crop of writers because they really wanted to do a lot of interpersonal conflict, and Roddenberry had this vision that
Everyone got
interpersonal
along.
conflict, everyone got along, and I know that caused some friction.
Well,
And
and
like,
you
there's
see
one
you
episode
see
that
that
sticks out.
in series moving forward. And we'll talk about that.
Yeah, I just remember there's one episode that sticks out where I really thought they were trying to push some serious points. It was right after Picard was turned into Locutus, and he's turned back into Picard, and he's trying to come to grips with the trauma that he's suffered. Do you remember that episode?
Yes.
And I just remember the acting in that episode not living up to the idea of the episode, what they were trying to do. I don't know if you got that feeling either, but I remember the guy who played his brother was kind of off. Just the tone of the acting was off sometimes in that series.
It was, however, I think it's probably the best acting of any of the Star Trek series.
Mm-hmm.
Admittedly, Star Trek has never been known for its attracting the best quality actors, despite the fact that a lot of them are classically trained stage actors.
Yeah, I would say I disagree with you a little bit because I thought, and I would have to rewatch the series, I thought Deep Space Nine kind of got the tone right a little, or at least got the tone better than Next Gen, as far as acting is concerned.
Yeah, although DS9 tends to be a little melodramatic,
That's for
especially
sure.
Avery Brooks.
Yeah, no, I'll grant. Yeah, that's for sure. I'm not saying they were perfect.
No.
There was a tone that they got that I liked a little bit better.
That's fair.
And do you remember talk about the differences between post and Roddenberry and post Roddenberry's death? The kind of the change in the themes and the motifs and the tones of the series, the television shows.
Yeah, I mean, you didn't get it as much in the Next Generation. By the time Roddenberry died, they were already into the 5th season, so a lot of the scripts had already been written and things like that. You got it a little bit in the 6th and 7th season where things were a little bit darker. You did start to get a little bit more of the interpersonal conflict. An episode that comes to mind for that is 7th season Pegasus, where Riker has to decide whether to disobey an order from his former commanding officer, who is an admiral, or to tell Picard about basically the illegal experiment they were running at the time, back in the day.
Yeah, I do.
There was some conflict on that one.
There was also a lot of romantic tension that started to crop up, particularly between like Worf and Deanna Troi, and that continued in later series such as Bashir and the Daxes when they changed over, Worf and Dax. O'Brien, Avery Brooks's Cisco's wife, stuff like that, or new girlfriend and his dead wife.
Yeah.
That was kind of cool. Did you like that kind of tonal change? Do you think, even though it doesn't live up to the way Roddenberry wanted to take it, how do you feel about it?
No, I mean, I like it. Deep Space Nine is by far my favorite series, and that's really where the shift came.
Right. No, that's true. The uniforms changed, the special effects changed. I mean, a lot of it had a very different look.
Well, and a lot of that actually has to do with the guy who was the showrunner. So DS9 started in '93, so it overlapped Next Gen by about 2 years. And the first couple of years, you were starting to get some of that tone shift still. You know, that is one thing. It was when Roddenberry died, it wasn't just a dramatic left turn, right? It was very gradual change.
That is very true.
But I think the biggest change came when Ira Steven Behr took over as the showrunner for DS9. And he really, I don't know if he didn't like the tone of Star Trek, but I mean, I've heard interviews with him saying, you know, part of the reason they did things a certain way in DS9 was to kind of move away from a little bit. Like, the relationship with technology wasn't always so friendly. Right? They were on the Cardassian station with the mix of technologies and it didn't always work right and that kind of stuff.
That was always a funny thing about Star Trek. And I don't want to get too much into like comparing it to Star Wars or other science fiction shows, but people have pointed this out before. Star Trek, it was almost like there was no junk in space. There was no sharing economy or secondhand items that were kind of thrown around, whereas in like Star Wars there was recycling stations and junk, and Alien's a great example of, at least the first one, like really blue collar futuristic life. And that was always something that set Star Trek apart. Even when Gene Roddenberry died and they moved away from his utopian vision, they kept a lot of that cleanness. That was always kind of the style, was cleanness.
They did, although they really kept that mostly for Starfleet.
Mm-hmm.
You know, even in like Next Generation, there's a few episodes where you see like junk merchants and things like that. But you're right. It's certainly, here's the Federation over in this corner, and they're all nice and shiny and perfect and squeaky clean. Mm-hmm. And then there's 90% of everyone else who's not quite as clean, not quite as good, nice, but you know, it's still, you know, pretty fucking new and pretty nice. And there's this little tiny corner over here. These guys are junk dealers and whatever. Right?
Yeah, I always thought that when they
never got the sense that was more than like a very outside corner of the universe.
Right, and it even like struck me home as I'm thinking about it, or struck home for me as I think about it, with like Voyager, the series that follows DS9, where the ship is flung onto the other side of the galaxy and has to work its way home. You know, here's a ship that's going unattended to for many, many, many years, and I watched that series a lot. I can't really remember an episode where the ship just started to kind of break down or get, you know, needed patchworking. I feel like that would, you know, if there were different writers, you would have made that like a recurring motif. But I can't really think of anything where that was going on.
Right, well, and especially when you compare it to something like the first season of Battlestar Galactica.
Right, which I believe some of the showrunner or the writers called it the anti-Star Trek.
So I never heard that, but certainly, I mean, exactly what you're talking about in terms of those kinds of needs, and both for the ships and for the people, were far better addressed in something like Battlestar than Star Trek.
Mm-hmm. Now, we have, before we go into Enterprise, I want to wrap up real quickly the Next Gen movie series that started right after this show came to an end, right? 7 seasons it came to an end. You had Generations, First Contact, Insurrection, and Nemesis. And these were all kind of met with, I guess, lukewarm responses. How did you feel about these?
So, Generations, Insurrection, and Nemesis were all kind of lukewarm. I think the fan response to First Contact is pretty strong.
I think so too. I know a lot of people really like that one. I remember seeing it going to see it with very high expectations and then being very disappointed. It just didn't. I never really connected with First Contact.
See that actually is my number 2 slot.
Oh, okay.
For Star Trek films.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, for one, I loved the look of the Borg at that point.
Well, yeah, the Borg design was fantastic.
Right, and they've said all along that's what they wanted the Borg to look like, and they just couldn't make it happen in the TV show.
Sure.
Generations, I liked parts of it. And I was kind of hit and miss on the other one. So I'll see if we'll have to dig it up. The same guys who wrote the last episode of Next Generation, which we talked about a while back on the podcast, you and I did, and wrote Star Trek Generations, and then they basically wrote them at the same time.
Right. I believe they finished filming the series finale, and then like the next day they were filming the movie. Like they didn't even change studios.
I don't know about that, but you're right. There was definitely very little in between. But according to the writers, the series finale came super easy.
Mm-hmm.
And they really struggled and had to work hard on writing Generations. And it really turned into more of a buddy picture between Kirk and Picard as opposed to a Next Generation movie. And they kind of admit that that's the failing of the film.
Right. Yeah. I had mixed feelings. Yeah, lukewarm about Insurrection. I kind of enjoyed Nemesis just because it was kind of fun. It felt like they were remaking Wrath of Khan to me.
Yeah, I can see a little bit of that. I can get where you're coming from that. I mean, I think both Insurrection and Nemesis were fun movies in terms of a lot of action. They almost feel like you and I have talked about this a lot lately. The current the newest 3 Star Trek films are really like Star Trek action films. They're not really Star Trek films.
I want to get to that in a second, but
I was going to say this kind of feels a little bit like a transition,
right,
to that. Like they had Star Trek elements to it, but that it also had a lot more of the action to it as well.
Right. Oh no, without a doubt. Now the series takes a big changes direction. Like you had Star Trek Next Generation, immediately follows up the original. Well, it doesn't immediately follow up. They have like a big gap, but then DS9 immediately follows Next Gen. They're in the same time zone. There's even a little bit of crossover.
Yeah, they overlap, and then Voyager overlaps onto DS9.
When we do Star Trek Enterprise, we go back in time pre-Federation.
Yes.
Now, this was a series I had fairly high hopes for, in no small part because I like Scott Bakula. I was actually a big fan of Quantum Leap. This is one of the shows that I would come home to after like school and watch on the Sci-Fi Channel reruns. So I really liked Bakula.
Yep.
But I think I gave the series one season and really gave up on. I couldn't. It just didn't push my buttons the way I wanted it to. What was your take on this one?
So I think, just in general, Next Generation, like I said, got progressively better.
Right.
DS9, I think, got progressively better, but not as much as Next Gen did. Like percent, kind of.
Sure, and I will say I give them a lot of credit for DS9 starting the kind of long story arcs towards the end of that series.
Right. The 2 seasons of the Dominion Wars.
I thought that was really great.
Yeah. Voyager is a bit hit and miss. Right. There's a lot of good, but there's also some real.
Yeah, especially towards the end. Towards the end, it kind of looked like they were running out of ideas.
Yep. Enterprise, there are some really shining episodes out there, and there's some really awful episodes. And that first season, there's a couple of good ones in that first season. That first season's kind of rough. Mm-hmm. Second season is much better. Third season, I gotta give them a lot of credit for trying to do the Xindi thing, like for doing that whole arc, for attempting it.
Mm.
But it just, after a while, you're like, okay. Are we gonna blow up Earth? Are we gonna? No. Yes. No. Yes. All right. Fine. Just end it. I don't care anymore.
Right.
I mean,
that was the time travel arc. Was that the Xindis? The time travel arc?
It wasn't actually time travel.
What was it?
So
I can't remember. I don't remember
basically, creatures from the future were basically projecting themselves back or trying to influence events in the past to cause their future to be better and different.
Mm-hmm.
So kind of time travel, like the main characters, there's an actual time travel episode in there for the main characters. The main characters, though, basically stay in their own timeline the whole time.
Right.
Yeah, but basically, these creatures convince this alien race or group of alien races called the Xindi that the humans are going to destroy them in the future. So the Xindi should destroy humanity. So they send this test probe to attack Earth. And then when that's successful, they start building a much bigger probe to go just straight up blow up Earth.
Mm-hmm.
So the Enterprise has to travel into this what they call the Expanse,
Mm-hmm.
and try and convince the Xindi to not attack Earth.
Right. Right. How did you? I mean, did you? I mean, like I said, I tuned out of Star Trek by the time that series was in its second season. How did you feel about the whole series? It was only 4 seasons long.
It was only 4 seasons long. I got back into watching Star Trek early with Enterprise. It was all right, you know. Like I said, the Xindi stuff was not bad. Like I said, I give them a lot of credit. Just the ending kind of drug on. They had to have known about halfway through season 4 they were getting canceled, though, or or they knew that like season 4 was going to be their last season or something.
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of the episodes in season 4 are like these 3-part story arcs that really feel like they should have been like one episode. And so like part 1, part 2, and part 3 should have been like opening, after first commercial break, after second commercial break.
Right.
So yeah, they stretched out a little bit of material into a full season. So, you know, I felt you feel a little robbed. It was some good stuff, but I would have liked to have seen them do a little more with that last season.
So, picking up on what we talked about a little bit earlier, the new Star Treks get rebooted in 2009 with J.J. Abrams making the movie Star Trek. It's followed by Into Darkness and the movie that came out this year called Beyond, which, how did you... Now, I'll just come out and say it. I don't care for any of these 3 much at all. I kind of enjoyed Into Darkness because, again, it was just kind of fun. But for the most part, I don't think I enjoy these for the reasons that we kind of stated earlier, is they cease to be science fiction films and are pretty much action movies set in the Star Trek universe with the original set of characters after a time travel incident in the first movie. And I mean, part of the problem for me was they weren't getting science fiction authors or writers to do them. They were getting action movie directors or action movie guys.
Some are blockbuster folks.
Yeah, I mean, the one for Beyond was the director for Beyond was a Fast and Furious director.
Right.
So, you know, I can't, it's hard for me to say good things about them. I got a chance to, like, watch another half hour of Star Trek Beyond while I was waiting for another movie to start. And I was like, let me watch this for a little bit. I kind of caught the climactic end of Star Trek Beyond. It's really awful. Like, it's after watching it again, it's like, wow, this is tough to watch. This is bad. This is really, really bad.
Yeah, so yeah, I like parts of each of them. Like there's certain parts of especially the first one I really enjoyed. You know, they did I think the first one's probably closer to the Star Trek, to being Star Trek-y.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they did a real nice job of, I don't want to call it fan service, but they got a lot of things right in terms of just the look and the feel. There are certain things they didn't get right. The engine room pisses me off in that movie terribly. Because you're talking about, it's supposed to be the very clean technology look. And they literally filmed it in a brewery. And it looks like a brewery.
Yeah, it's a great point.
You know, so and it's unfortunate because I've seen production sketches for what they wanted for the engine room, and I'm like, oh my god, that would have been way cooler.
Yeah, it's just
it was a budget issue.
Yeah, and those movies had big enough budgets.
Yeah.
That's a tough discussion for another time. I don't know.
I think you're right. I mean, they're big action films. I was really disappointed with the fact that the second film decided to do Khan again.
Right. I know that. See, that didn't bother me as much as the story.
Benedict Cumberbatch playing Khan didn't bother me. Like that kind of, but like, if you're so that they went basically they did this whole time travel thing and this reboot in order to do new and different stuff,
Mm-hmm.
and then they didn't do new and different stuff. That's what bugged
No,
me.
I mean, yeah, that the second half of Into Darkness is basically the mirror image of Wrath of Khan.
Right, and that's what
And I'll grant,
that's what bugged
yeah.
me.
No, I can see that. That was so forced and so bad. I mean,
The first half of Inner Darkness was actually really good.
No, I'll say that. I'll agree with you there. I thought the first half was pretty good. I don't mind. See, introducing Khan as a whole didn't bother me because, I mean, if you really want to do new and different stuff, just do a whole new and different Star Trek. Why go back and reboot the original cast of characters?
Sure.
It's always kind of that always rubbed me the wrong way. But it was like, okay, if you're going to do it and you want to do fan service, I mean, fans love nostalgia. I mean, we saw this with the last Star Wars film.
Right.
So, to me, it would make perfect sense to bring back the nostalgic stuff from the original series that the fans would enjoy. I think the problem is the Star Trek fan base is a lot smaller than, say, like a Star Wars fan base. So little drops and little references don't play as big as they did, like, say, in Force Awakens, as they would in these Star Trek films. I really think these new Star Trek films are really trying to grab and bring new fans into the series. And I don't know if they're doing a very good job of it.
Yeah,
I don't know if they're succeeding.
It's certainly Star Trek references are certainly not, for the most part, are not as ubiquitous as Star Wars references. I don't think. I mean, there's a couple things that like you could do or say, and people would get them better. Like, but on the whole, I think there's a lot more of that with Star Wars.
Yeah.
And then now we're getting ready for Star Trek Discovery here in just a couple of months.
Yeah, I think this is a good spot to close it out.
It's been 12 years since the last series, so...
we talked about it briefly on another podcast. I'm optimistic. I think the ship looks like crap, but I want to give it a chance.
No, I'm excited. We'll see.
We will see. I hope they really capture elements of science fiction that made the series great. I want them to kind of go hardcore science fiction and not really make kind of an action-y film or an action-y story.
Yeah. No, this will be an interesting experiment to see. Does Star Trek? I mean, Star Trek. This is 50 years now. Does Star Trek have the longevity to continue for another, couple generations?
Yeah, I mean, we will certainly find out. Well, I think that's a good spot to wrap it up. Do you want to do the quick, what have you been into this? And then we'll send the folks on their way.
Sure. So this week I have been binge reading Kevin Hickman's East of West, which is a comic series, basically kind of alternate history meets the apocalypse kind of thing. And it's really interesting. I had read it probably about up to where I am now, like as it was coming out, as the issues were coming out, and then I've just kind of fallen off, but still been picking up the issues. So I've been catching up on that, and I also just spent the afternoon basically clearing my desk, or my other desk, so I have a place to work on some other upcoming projects for the blog.
Mm-hmm.
And then Becky and I also binge watched all of both seasons of Gallant.
Oh, I don't know that one.
It's hysterical. It's basically a fantasy comedy set.
Okay.
It was on ABC for 2 seasons.
ABC,
I think.
they sing.
Yeah,
I've seen some of this. Yeah.
yeah, very talented, very talented vocalist. But I mean, it's also just really funny, very tongue in cheek about the whole fantasy genre.
Right. For me, speaking of Star Trek, I got into Star Trek Attack Wing, which is the tabletop ship battle miniature game. Played a couple games. It's cool. You can play with just 2 ships per 1v1 or multiple ships. It's pretty neat. I played it a couple times.
How many times did you lose your Oberth?
I haven't played that one out yet. I have it. I have an Oberth class, and those things have to explode. But I tried. I played as the Klingons and lost badly to the girl, like really badly. She played as the Enterprise and kicked the shit out of me. It was pretty ugly. I also picked up a copy of Before Incal. I'm really down to read that. Got the third volume, trade paperback of Sex Criminals, and the sixth volume of Saga. I got to get to them. I got to retry. I got to start Saga over again and reread it because it lost me somewhere, and I don't know where or why. But it lost.
I did that a couple months back, and there was a lot of stuff I had forgot. I just straight up forgotten about.
Was it in a good way or a bad way?
Good way. It was like, oh yeah, I forgot. I totally forgot about this whole subplot and stuff.
And we just binge watched Stranger Things, the Netflix original series. Do you know about this?
I do. I have yet to watch it.
Very good, really good.
Everyone's telling me.
Yeah, I was like, yeah. Everyone had said the same thing to me. Very compelling. There are some parts of it you go, oh, okay, fine, I'll let that go. But overall, good storytelling, good quality storytelling. So I have to say, I'm very happy with that. And I did my first D&D game yesterday.
How'd that go?
I died.
Did you really?
Yeah. Three? What was it? Three? You die and you have to do the death saves or whatever they are.
Yep.
Failed all three in a row. Done.
Damn.
First combat of the game. Took us 3 hours to finally get to like a suit of armor that came to life, and we were gonna fight it. And it just put a sword straight through my chest, and I fell down the steps, and that was it. My party member,
wow.
One party member rolled 3 critical fails in a row. Going up the steps, rolled a 1, fell on his face. Tried to get up to fight the suit of armor, missed, hit another party member, tried to attack again, and injured himself with his own weapon. And then I died. It was... But by that point, I was okay.
As a side note,
okay,
I started my Star Wars group back up, and one of the characters starts off in jail, and it's not a very nice jail, so they took away his bucket. So he really had to go. So he's like I'm gonna poop right here. Like they're on a landing pad. He's like, I'm gonna poop right here. And the other party members trying to force him into the shuttle, and I'm like, tell you what, make an endurance check. Let's see if you can hold it. The answer was nope.
Good.
And then later on, he decided to punch a character who was wearing a helmet. Forgot the character was wearing a helmet, so he just takes a swing at him. That
broke his hand.
Yep, that didn't go well.
Oh, that's great. All right.
Turns out my adventurers are morons. I love them though.
Always makes it interesting. Okie doke.
All right, folks, if you like what we do, make sure you head on over to thereforeageek.com. Check out our blog posts and our podcasts. You can find us on Facebook, on Instagram, and on Twitter. And you can find this podcast and other podcasts like it on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and YouTube. So once again, I'm Andrew.
I'm the dude.
And you've been listening to Therefore a Geek.